Everyone knows my husband, Ron DeSantis, is endorsed by President Trump, but he's also an amazing dad. Ron loves playing with the kids.
Build the wall.
He reads stories.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part.
He's teaching Madison to talk.
Make America great again.
People say Ron's all Trump, but he is so much more.
Big league. So good.
I just thought you should know.
Ron DeSantis for governor.
A lot of boring math later.
We don't want to run against Ron DeSanctimonious with his high heels and his bobblehead bullshit, you know. No, he looks like a bobblehead doll. I don't like him because I endorsed him and, you know, I got him elected. You told me exactly.
Oh, but it's sad when a love affair dies. Isn't it sad? Heartbreaking,
no.
right?
No, it's not.
It's not. As this pointless Republican primary kind of chugs along with useless debates and town halls, we are back to fear and Florida men on the campaign trail.
I was right in the middle of a reptile zoo, and somebody was giving booze to these goddamn things.
As a native Florida man myself, I am well aware that the politics of my home state are tougher to crack than the Zodiac Killer's cipher. And our last 7 years have somehow managed to be uniquely inexplicable. Fear not, my fellow truth seekers. NBC News national politics reporter Matt Dixon, Florida's own Enigma translation machine, is here with his new book, Swamp Monsters, Trump versus DeSantis. Matt Dixon, thank you for being here. Where did the first cracks in the MAGA love story between Trump and DeSantis first start to form, and what was ultimately the anvil that broke the camel's back here in this relationship?
I mean, if you want to call it a MAGA love story, I think the cracks really started at the beginning. You played that ad. That ad was before Ron DeSantis was governor. It's when forward facing, they were holding hands, they were best friends, picnics in the park, all of that. But even in that moment in time, and we get into it in the book about how the DeSantis campaign, particularly Casey, who's very influential, didn't particularly like the ad. They thought it was kind of corny, but were ultimately convinced to do it because that was sort of peak powers for Trump. His endorsement was rocket fuel. So they were pretty much just seen as checking a box. And that got back to the Trump crew and President Trump himself, and they were none too pleased. So it wasn't boiling over publicly at that point. They were still good for a couple of years, working hand in hand. But that was really the start of the idea that there was tension or a little bit of mistrust. And I think that the anvil that sort of broke it all is just DeSantis' rise in the polls. I mean, throughout the 2022 midterms, the America's governor stuff, he was beating Trump and head to head in a lot of polling nationally and in specific states. And it all comes down to one word for Trump. It's all about loyalty, all about loyalty. And he doesn't think Ron DeSantis was loyal to him because he endorsed him and played a huge role in helping make him governor and then ran against him. And I think this is as personal as it is political, and it's going to go on for past this campaign in the primary season.
The book is kind of filled with, chock full of these kinds of behind the scenes anecdotes, some really outstanding access, some hilarious interviews and sound bites all throughout. And between my mild bouts of PTSD while reading the book, I think it's like an alternately haunting and hilarious first draft of history that I think is pretty essential to understanding one of only two major political parties in this country, and it's now modern transformation and history. And you made an interesting point that I wonder about. Does DeSantis hate this guy? Has he always hated this guy? Was he ever a true MAGA believer, or did he just need or use Trump to get elected? This was just, at least one way, a relationship of convenience.
Sure. Oh, 100%. I think very much a relationship of convenience. And I don't know that DeSantis has ever been truly sort of a follower of MAGA or America First, whatever it's called these days. I think he's always kind of been in the power acquisition game. And he's been concerned about his rise and sort of the quickest way to ascend. And without question, that moment in time was a Donald Trump endorsement. He got it. So I certainly wouldn't say that he hates the guy, or at least he didn't in the beginning, even though there's been been, an uneasiness about their relationship the whole time. I mean, I do think some of the policy stuff that the two are genuinely aligned on, but I don't think DeSantis is a movement or a follower of any movement except kind of his own.
There's a really intriguing kind of, I don't want to call it your thesis per se, but among your theses in the book that, Florida has gone from swing state where it was important historically and politically now to like the ultimate Republican state. And that's now kind of what seems to be crucial about and super relevant about Florida right now. I want to read this passage from your introduction. The Republican Party's mascot has, of course, remained the elephant, but the new party could just as easily be represented by a shirtless man from Florida wearing Mickey Mouse ears while riding an alligator through the Everglades, a pub sub in one hand, a cafecito in the other, and a half-smoked cigar clenched between his teeth. It is now the party of Florida man. And so Florida really embodies the WWEification of American politics to me. Performative conflict over policy, culture wars over, governing, style over substance. How does this Trump versus DeSantis battle here represent the
It's the first time I've heard that read out loud. It certainly hits different. The book originally was supposed to be about that. After it was the nation's largest swing state, and it's now, especially after DeSantis and Trump, certainly a center right state. And my publisher sat me down at one point and said, "Hey Matt, if you want to sell any of these books, you got to take your Florida nerd hat off and expand a little bit. Maybe let's focus on the two biggest characters in American politics at the moment." So really that was kind of the evolution of the book from what you described to what it is today. But we still kept a lot of the initial reporting and a lot of the initial writing about just that, about how Republicans have not just sort of surpassed Democrats in the state, but the Democratic Party has catered here. There's 600,000 plus more registered Republicans than there are Democrats in the state right now, and Democrats forever held that registration lead. So DeSantis' 20-point victory, as we're kind of learning, his re-election victory by 20 points, as we're kind of learning, was just as much about he was a politician on a hot streak, but it was also he was functionally running without opposition, and that's kind of, to really implement some of the things you outlined as far as, what he's focusing on, what the state's focusing on, and how it's kind of become the clubhouse for the post-MAGA Republican Party.
And to be clear, as we enter this presidential election year, Florida is not still a swing state, isn't it? It is not a purple state. I mean, Georgia is a swing state certainly compared to Florida.
Without question. I mean, I think there's still enough Democrats here. There's potential for it to regain that title at some point in the future. I don't know that I would totally count it out, but as of right now, I don't think the Democrats at the state level are in the game of winning presidential races, U.S. Senate races. Rick Scott's reelection is up this cycle, and they're not getting as much help as they used to from the national Democrats. As a result, the money in 2022 from national Democrats pouring into Florida was significantly reduced from what Democrats are used to. So no money and fewer voters is just not a good equation for winning races. And right now, that's kind of the rut that they're stuck in.
Well, I think the National Democratic Party has determined that there's no ROI here in Florida.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just,
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not worth the investment when they can invest it in, for example, Georgia.
Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina are the new Floridas. And they're a lot cheaper. Florida's got 10 really expensive media markets. You can do a lot more in some of those smaller states than you could in Florida.
And the Democrats don't need Florida to win a presidential election. The Republicans do.
That's right. Yep. And they're not even, Democrats nationally don't even make the calculation anymore that, well, maybe it's, though we don't need Florida, the other guys do. So let's, spend some resources there and try to take it off the map. That's not even really much of a consideration at the moment.
How much of DeSantis's rise can be credited to his wife, Casey, who seems to be, by all accounts, the more savvy, charismatic, maybe even more ambitious of the two in the couple?
Sure, not insignificant. She's a very close advisor, and we can, talk about how DeSantis is imploding nationally, but becoming a 2-term governor of the state of Florida is, a pretty impressive feat, and sort of something more than, 99.9% of politicians will ever achieve or ever get to. So, and her guidance and her counsel is really what resonates most with him. He's got, a circle of advisors like every politician does at a major level, but their voices don't break through nearly to the degree that hers does. They're, sort of functionally more yes men than sort of steering the ship. But Casey's weight has sway. So the degree to which her counsel has helped him win 2 races, and including a big one in his reelection, I don't think we totally overstated, even though, he's limping a bit as a politician right now.
2 more questions before we go. First, I wonder what went wrong prior to entering the this GOP primary. DeSantis was polling through the roof, not just in Florida, but nationally. And now it's just like, I don't even think he's beating Nikki Haley at this point. So what went wrong with Ron DeSantis going national?
I think there's a lot of people right now, and we've been doing a bunch of interviews on this, sort of point to the 6 months after his reelection win to when he actually got in. He was reelected by this huge margin we've been talking about, November of 2022. Didn't get in until May 24th, which is a huge window where he lost momentum. His poll numbers just in that time period were already starting to go down. And he functionally kind of launched a presidential campaign from a position of weakness, when months earlier he still had all that America's governor mo and was kind of at his peak political power. So I do think there's a moment there. The governor's team decided, we're going to focus on, we do this book tour and sort of pretend like they're political rallies, and then project the idea that we're focusing on our state's legislative session. We're the sort of more effective bureaucrats than Trump. We can actually get things done. And that was the image they were projecting at that time. But it served nothing but to sort of create a vacuum that Trump very quickly filled and sort of brutally filled. It was sort of became the meatball Ron era, that period of time.
I wish I had the carts working. I've got carts for all of this.
You goddamn right, you meatball.
Thank you. Thanks, Roy. Roy, we're doing it manual here. We'll do it live. We'll do the carts live.
I like it. It adds some character. It really does.
It really does.
A little soul. Yeah.
Matt Dixon, in the last 30 seconds here, I've talked about this with Mark Caputo. I'm going to talk about it with Florida State Rep Aneska Mani later in the show. With the, I think, inevitable and perhaps imminent end of the DeSantis presidential campaign in 2024, perhaps only weeks away, what does a bruised, battered, defeated lame duck DeSantis look like coming back to the state of Florida with his veto pen sharpened?
Yeah, I think he's gonna come back angry and try to reassert himself over the legislature. I mean, he had complete and total control over the Republican-dominated legislature over the past few years. There are some people who are opining that losing on the national stage and sort of having to come home with the tail between his legs is going to somehow create olive branches, or just it'll be a different dynamic in the legislature, which I do not think is going to happen. So I think we're going to see what we saw, out of Governor DeSantis in the past few legislative sessions, and probably a compliant legislature that's willing to go along with them. It is notable, the legislative session in Tallahassee just started, and DeSantis really hasn't outlined any sort of policy agenda, and that's different than years past, where he would have big splashy press conferences across the state to announce what he wanted lawmakers to do. We haven't seen any of it this year because he's running for president, so he hasn't really articulated an agenda he wants them to pass at the moment. But I think the moment he gets back, and when that really starts to get going, it's going to feel a lot like it has the past few sessions here.
NBC News national politics reporter and author of the new book, Swamp Monsters, Trump versus DeSantis, Matt Dixon, good luck with the book. I love it.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate having me.